The house felt unbearably still as I drifted from one half-packed box to another, my fingers lingering on photo frames I wasn't ready to put away. The sharp smell of cardboard mixed with the fading trace of his cologne, clinging stubbornly to the air. Every corner seemed to whisper memories I could hardly stand to face. Just days ago, my world shattered with the news of his sudden accident, and the silence of widowhood weighed on me like a heavy cloak. Then, piercing that silence, came the sound I least expected, the doorbell. I froze, my breath catching as my heart started to race. Maybe it was a neighbor with another casserole, or a relative ready to drown me in condolences I couldn't stomach. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and forced myself to move toward the door. Grief had left me fragile, hollowed out, yet I still clung to the small dignity of holding myself together. With a slow breath, I turned the handle, bracing for sympathy I no longer wanted. Instead, what I found standing there left me stunned. On my porch was a woman who didn't belong to the world of mourning. She was flawless, elegantly dressed with confidence dripping from every angle of her polished presence. Beside her stood a man in a dark suit, clutching a leather folder like it carried a final verdict. Her eyes weren't kind, not softened by loss. They were cold, calculating, almost triumphant. And in that instant, I knew this visit wasn't about condolences. It was something else. Something far more dangerous. The woman didn't waste a second. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't kind. It was sharp, almost smug. "I'm Anna," she said, her voice steady, rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Then came the blow that nearly knocked the air from my lungs. "I was your husband's lover. Before he died, he transferred this house into my name. So I'd like you to gather your things and leave." Each word sliced through the fragile shell of grief I'd been clinging to, leaving me raw, exposed. I stood frozen in the doorway, gripping the frame as though it might anchor me to the earth that had just shifted beneath my feet. My mind scrambled to catch up, to piece together the nightmare unraveling in front of me. He had a lover? He transferred the house? I felt my stomach twist, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue. Mourning had already gutted me, and now this stranger was stripping away the very walls around me. For a moment, the silence between us felt deafening, as if the whole world held its breath waiting for my collapse. But I didn't collapse. Somehow, in the chaos of disbelief, a memory flashed across my mind. Something tucked away, buried in the endless paperwork of our marriage. A clause. One my lawyer had insisted on years ago, one I had almost forgotten. My pulse steadied, just a little, as the pieces shifted. She thought she was winning, but she didn't know what I knew. Beneath my shock, a small, dangerous ember of defiance began to spark. I forced my lips to move, but no words came out at first. Only the dry rasp of a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Anna's eyes glittered with satisfaction, certain she had me cornered. The lawyer at her side shuffled the folder in his hands, already preparing to hand me papers that would erase the life I had built brick by brick. I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. If grief hadn't broken me, neither would she. "I see," I finally managed, my voice steadier than I felt. I stepped aside just enough to give the illusion of calm, though my legs trembled under the weight of it all. "Why don't you come in?" I said, the words tasting bitter but deliberate. She tilted her head, a smirk tugging at her lips, convinced my invitation was submission. But it wasn't. It was strategy. Because if she thought she'd already won, she would talk, and I needed her to talk. As they crossed the threshold, I glanced back at the half-packed boxes, symbols of a life that seemed to vanish by the second. My heart pounded with both fear and something new, resolve. She thought this was the end of my story, but it wasn't. Not even close. And while she settled inside, basking in her false victory, I was already shaping the next move in silence. I closed the door behind them, the click echoing in my ears like a seal on some twisted fate. Inside, the air felt heavier, tighter, as if the walls themselves sensed the intrusion. Anna walked with the ease of someone who believed she belonged, her heels tapping against my hardwood floor like gavel strikes in a courtroom I hadn't agreed to enter. My heart thudded in my chest, but I steadied my breathing. If she wanted a performance, I'd give her one. Only it wouldn't be the one she expected. I forced a polite smile, the kind that masks storms brewing just beneath the surface. "If you were that important to him," I said softly, my tone sweetened by practiced control, "then you deserve a proper goodbye. Why don't we sit for coffee? You can tell me everything." The words rolled off my tongue smoother than I imagined, and I saw the flicker of satisfaction cross her face. She thought she was winning. She thought I was surrendering. That belief was my greatest weapon. As I moved toward the kitchen, I let my fingers brush across the counter, my mind sharpening with every step. Years of paperwork, contracts, and fine print had left me with one crucial safeguard: the clause. All I needed was her arrogance, her pride, her unfiltered truth. I reached for the coffee pot with steady hands, but what I really reached for was my phone. A quick swipe, a hidden tap, and the red light of recording came to life. She wanted to take my home, but I was about to take her words. The aroma of coffee began to fill the kitchen, wrapping the moment in an almost domestic disguise. I stirred the sugar slowly, giving myself time to steady the rush of adrenaline coursing through me. From the living room, I could hear Anna laughing lightly, her voice dripping with the kind of arrogance that only comes from someone who believes she has already won. That laugh was all the confirmation I needed. I was playing this exactly right. Carrying the tray back into the room, I set down the cups with careful grace, as though this were nothing more than a polite afternoon visit. "Cream or black?" I asked, keeping my tone warm, my smile soft. She barely looked up as she answered, her attention already fixed on how comfortably she fit into my home, like she was rehearsing for ownership. It made my stomach twist, but I kept my mask firmly in place. Let her believe it. The deeper her confidence, the easier it would be to unravel her. I sat across from her, folding my hands neatly in my lap, eyes wide with false curiosity. "Tell me," I said gently, "what was it like, being with him?" The question landed exactly as I'd hoped. Her expression shifted, lips parting with a spark of excitement. She thought I wanted details out of pain, that I was desperate to hear her version of the truth. But the only thing I wanted was for her to talk herself straight into my trap, one careless confession at a time. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes glittering as though she had been waiting for this invitation to gloat. The lawyer sat quietly beside her, shuffling his papers, but she was the one who craved the spotlight. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch until she couldn't resist filling it. And just like that, she started talking, little hints first, then sharper edges, as if each word was a trophy she was proud to display. Inside, every syllable stung like salt on an open wound, but I didn't flinch. I nodded, murmured small words of encouragement, as if I were the grieving widow desperate for scraps of truth. She had no idea that every arrogant detail, every cruel boast, was being captured inches away on my phone. She thought she was reclaiming my husband's legacy. In reality, she was building the case that would shatter hers. The more she spoke, the calmer I became, my grief hardening into something colder, sharper. I glanced at the boxes stacked by the door, once symbols of loss, now standing like soldiers waiting for my command. She believed she was taking over my home, my life. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that I was already turning the table, preparing for a battle she didn't even know she had walked into. Her voice poured out like a poisoned stream, smooth but deadly. She started with the affair itself, painting herself as the woman he couldn't resist. I watched her eyes light up as she spoke, her words dressed in pride rather than shame. She bragged about stolen weekends, whispered promises, and how he swore she was the one he truly loved. Each sentence struck me like a blow to the chest, yet I forced myself to sit still, my expression a mask of quiet interest. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, as though he sensed her indulgence had crossed a line, but she didn't care. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were doing me a favor by telling me. "He wanted me to have everything," she said, tapping her manicured finger on the armrest. "This house, his accounts, even the car you used to drive." She didn't notice the slight tremor in my hand as I lifted my coffee cup, hiding the fire raging beneath my calm surface. I nodded softly, encouraging her with a glance, as though I were trying to piece together a puzzle she alone could finish. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a puzzle. It was a confession, and every careless boast was another nail sealing her fate. My phone lay quietly on the counter beside us, its screen dark, its microphone alive, capturing every last word she thought she owned. Anna's voice grew bolder with each sip of coffee, as if the bitterness fueled her arrogance. She described how he had promised her a future, how she was the one he truly trusted. I listened, silent, my hands folded neatly in my lap, as though her words weren't cutting me open piece by piece. Inside, I felt the sting of betrayal tightening my chest, but I refused to let her see it. She mistook my stillness for weakness, not realizing it was control. She went on about the transfers, how she convinced him that I didn't appreciate what he had, how she played the part of his savior while I was painted as the burden. Her words dripped with satisfaction, as though she were savoring every detail. I met her eyes, nodding gently, feeding her ego so she'd keep talking. The lawyer looked uneasy, his gaze darting toward me, perhaps sensing something wasn't right. But Anna? She was intoxicated by her own lies. Every detail, every smug admission, landed exactly where I needed it to, on the recording hidden in plain sight. The air felt heavy with her confessions, but to her, it was victory. To me, it was proof. And while she relished tearing apart the life I thought I'd had, I knew she was stitching together the net that would trap her in the end. Her words tumbled out faster now, like a dam breaking, spilling secrets she should have buried. She laughed softly, shaking her head as she recalled how easily he signed the papers. "He said you'd never see it coming," she added, her tone dripping with cruel delight. My fingers tightened around my cup, but my face remained calm, a polite smile painted where anger threatened to break through. The more she boasted, the clearer my path became. I leaned in just slightly, as though I were clinging to every word, desperate for scraps of the truth. In reality, I was listening with the precision of a surgeon, noting each arrogant confession. The lawyer shifted again, perhaps aware that this performance was unraveling into recklessness. But Anna didn't care. She was basking in her illusion of victory, too blinded by pride to see the trap she had walked into. When her voice finally softened, satisfied with her own storytelling, I simply nodded. My phone, still glowing faintly on the counter, held everything: the affair, the transfers, the betrayal laid bare in her own words. For the first time since she'd knocked on my door, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, yes, but now it was joined by something far stronger, a resolve that would carry me into the next move, where the fine print she ignored would rewrite everything. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, the air thick with the sterile scent of leather and ink. My hands trembled slightly as I placed my phone on the polished desk, its screen lighting up with the recording I'd captured. With a single tap, Anna's voice filled the room, confident, smug, incriminating. My lawyer leaned forward, listening intently, his brow lifting with each damning word. He didn't have to say it out loud. I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't just gossip. It was evidence. When the recording ended, silence lingered, broken only by the quiet hum of the air conditioner. My lawyer slid his glasses off, setting them down with deliberate care. "You understand what this means?" he asked, his tone steady, almost reverent. I nodded, my heart pounding as he explained the power of the infidelity clause we had drafted years ago. The very clause I had nearly forgotten was now my shield, my weapon, my salvation. Anna's so-called victory had just voided itself. I exhaled, long and shaky, as the weight of the revelation settled over me. The house, the accounts, everything my husband had tried to hand away, it all circled back to me. For the first time since his death, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Control. Not joy, not triumph, but a fierce steadiness. Grief had left me hollow, but betrayal had given me fire. And now, with the law on my side, I was ready to face her again. not as the broken widow she thought I was, but as the woman who would take back everything. That evening, as I returned home, the house no longer felt like a cage of memories. Instead, it felt like a fortress I had reclaimed, brick by brick. The boxes by the door stood untouched, a silent reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. But now I knew the truth. Anna hadn't taken my future. She had signed her own defeat the moment she bragged into my recorder. My grief had been real, my pain undeniable, but her arrogance had lit a spark I refused to let die out. When the knock came again, I was ready. This time I didn't feel dread curling in my stomach. I felt something colder, sharper, like steel. Anna stood on the porch once more, her chin lifted high, expecting the same trembling widow she had met the day before. But my hands didn't shake when I opened the door. My smile wasn't bitter, but deliberate. Behind me, neatly stacked on the table, lay the legal documents my lawyer had prepared. The fine print she never considered was about to become her undoing. She walked in with the same air of entitlement, her heels tapping across my floor like a countdown to her own downfall. I led her toward the same chair she had sat in before, only now I wasn't playing hostess. I was judge and executioner, cloaked in calm. She looked at me with a smirk, ready to savor what she thought was her victory. But I no longer felt small in her presence. I had the law, the proof, and a storm of quiet power behind me. And soon, she'd see it. I slid the papers across the table, the sound of crisp pages cutting through the silence between us. Anna's smirk faltered as her eyes scanned the bold lettering, her fingers stiffening around the documents she thought would confirm her triumph. Instead, they spelled out her defeat. My lawyer's seal stamped every page, backed by the recording of her own voice. She looked up, confusion flickering into disbelief, and for the first time I saw her composure crack. "You thought you won," I said quietly, my voice calm but edged with steel. "But you didn't read the fine print. He promised you my house, but he left me his empire." The words rolled off my tongue with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. The woman who had barged into my grief, certain she'd erased me, was now staring at the walls she could never claim. Every ounce of her arrogance drained, leaving only the hollow echo of a gamble she had lost. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She reached for the papers again, as if hoping the ink would magically change under her touch. But it wouldn't. I leaned back, folding my hands, watching her struggle with the reality she had walked straight into. The same walls that had heard her gloating confession now bore witness to her collapse. And in that moment, I knew. My mourning had ended. The game had shifted, and from here on out, it was mine to play. When Anna finally left, her heels no longer struck the floor with confidence. They dragged, hesitant, echoing with the weight of her loss. I watched her step into the night, clutching nothing but the bitterness of her own arrogance. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was liberating. For the first time since the accident, I felt air rush into my lungs without grief pressing down on it. My house was mine again. My life was mine again. And her chapter in it was closed. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee warming my hands. Instead of tears, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the early light, and began to write. Not every detail, not every name, but enough. Enough for women like me to see they weren't powerless. That betrayal didn't have to be the end. I typed with purpose, each word a thread of defiance woven into a story that deserved to be told. By the end of the day, my post was live. I called it the Widow's Clause. At first, I expected silence, maybe a handful of sympathetic comments. Instead, the story spread like wildfire, shared by strangers who whispered that they had lived through the same pain. My grief had been personal, but my revenge was universal. And as I read their messages, I realized that my voice, once silenced by betrayal, was now echoing far louder than Anna's ever could. The messages kept pouring in, women from every corner of the world sharing their own scars, their own stories of betrayal and survival. Some were raw, still bleeding from fresh wounds. Others spoke from years of distance, their pain transformed into wisdom. I read every single one, my heart swelling with a mix of sorrow and pride. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a mirror for countless others, proof that even in the ashes of deceit, strength could be found. I looked around my living room, the same space where Anna had once strutted as though she owned it. Now it felt different, infused with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. The ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, even the faint hum of the refrigerator, they no longer sounded like loneliness. They sounded like life, like home. The fortress I thought I had lost had never really left me. It had only waited for me to reclaim it. As night fell, I curled up in my favorite chair, with a blanket draped across my shoulders. The glow of my phone lit the room as I scrolled through messages of gratitude and solidarity. Each word reminded me that revenge didn't always have to roar. Sometimes it whispered, quiet, steady, undeniable. And in its quietness, it carried more weight than any outburst ever could. The steam from my coffee curled upward as I sat in the quiet glow of the morning, sunlight spilling across the room like a blessing. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood with a message that made my lips curve into a knowing smile. It was Anna. "Please, can we talk?" Desperation bled through every word, her confidence stripped away, leaving only the emptiness she had tried to pass on to me. I let the phone ring in my mind for a moment, savoring the irony, before pressing one simple button: block. No grand speeches, no second chances. Just silence. The kind of silence that carried more power than any reply ever could. I leaned back, feeling the weight I had carried for weeks dissolve into the air around me. For once, my silence was not grief. It was victory. I whispered to myself, steady and certain, "You thought you buried me, but I inherited everything." And in that moment, the words weren't just about property, or money, or even revenge. They were about life, about dignity, about finding myself in the wreckage. The house was still standing, but more importantly, so was I, and that was the real inheritance he could never take away.